Close your eyes if you haven't already. Tonight we're going somewhere quiet, not a forest, not a beach, somewhere most people never think to imagine, the inside of a large commercial building late at night long after everyone has gone home. Picture it with me. The lobby is dim. A single low light glows near the front desk, just bright enough to outline the edges of the furniture, the soft shapes of chairs, the dark glass of the doors. Outside, the parking lot lights hum faintly, casting long, calm shadows across empty rows of parked cars. Somewhere above, on one of the upper floors, a hallway light dims itself, slowly, almost imperceptibly, easing into a lower, gentler glow. The building feels still, empty, asleep almost. But it isn't, really. Behind the walls, above the ceiling tiles, inside thin metal ducts running through dark mechanical rooms, something is awake. Something has been awake the entire time, and will stay awake long after the sun comes up again. It doesn't have a face. It doesn't have a voice. But it is, in its own quiet way, thinking. This is the building's hidden brain. We call it a building automation system, a BAS for short, if you ever come across the term. And tonight, we're going to drift gently through it together, not to study it, not to worry about it, just to notice it, to let it become part of the stillness around you rather than something separate from it. Because right now, in 1,000 buildings just like this one, in offices and hospitals and schools and quiet government buildings with the lights turned low, the same hidden brain is at work. Calm, steady, endless. Let it carry you. Here is the first thing to understand, and then you can let it settle into the background of your mind, the way distant traffic settles into background noise. A commercial building is not actually empty at night, not in the way it looks. Long after the last person has switched off their desk lamp and walked out to their car, long after the cleaning crew has finished and locked the doors behind them, the building keeps going, quietly, steadily, a slow, continuous rhythm of sensors checking, of small mechanical parts adjusting, of signals passing back and forth in the dark. It happens nowhere you can see. It happens inside walls, inside ducts, inside small gray boxes mounted near ceilings, half forgotten, easy to overlook even in daylight, and it never really stops. Right now, somewhere in this building, thousands of individual decisions are sitting quietly in memory. Small, settled choices about temperature, about airflow, about light levels, made long before tonight, waiting patiently to be carried out exactly the same way they always are. Nobody made these decisions this evening. They were decided once, calmly, by an engineer who is probably home asleep right now too, and the building simply remembers them and follows them over and over, night after night. There are documents somewhere in a filing cabinet or a folder on a computer that describe step by step, almost like a quiet instruction manual, exactly how this building is meant to behave through every single hour of the day and night. What should happen at 6 in the morning? What should happen at midnight? What should happen if it's a Tuesday in July versus a Sunday in January? The building doesn't need to think about any of this. It already knows. It's already decided. All it has to do now is follow along gently, the way a river follows the shape of its riverbed, without ever needing to question where it's going. And so, long after the last person has left, the building keeps a slow, steady rhythm running underneath everything. Sensors checking, controllers adjusting, small signals passing quietly through the dark. You don't need to remember any of that right now. Just let it settle. In some buildings, this hidden brain doesn't work alone. It often joins together with other systems, lighting and security and ventilation, all woven into one calm, coordinated whole instead of each one running off on its own, unaware of what the others are doing. When a motion sensor near a back stairwell notices that no one has walked through in over an hour, that same quiet observation can ripple outward. The lights dim a little further. The ventilation in that section eases back just slightly since there's no one there breathing the air. None of it needs a person to make these connections happen. The systems already know how to listen to each other. And somewhere, usually in a small office no one ever visits, there's a screen. Just one screen, often left on overnight, glowing softly in an empty room. On it, the entire building is represented in simple shapes. A few calm icons, a handful of soft-colored lines, gentle representations of dozens of real mechanical systems humming away behind real walls. A blue icon for the chiller. A small fan shape, slowly spinning, for an air handler 3 floors up. Nothing dramatic, nothing urgent, just quiet shapes, quietly moving, on a screen nobody is watching tonight. That screen doesn't need anyone to watch it. It keeps its calm record either way. Now, let's slow down even further and follow just one part of this hidden brain, the part that watches temperature. Of everything the building pays attention to overnight, temperature is one of its oldest, gentlest concerns. Long before anyone called this smart or automated, buildings have always needed some way to know whether a room is too warm or too cool or just right. Tonight, that job belongs to small devices called temperature sensors, and they are scattered through this building in places you'd probably never notice. Picture one now. Just a small, plain, off-white plastic plate mounted quietly on a wall, about chest height, in some ordinary hallway or office. You've probably walked past 100 of them in your life without a second glance. Inside that small plastic plate is something called a thermistor, a tiny electronic component, smaller than a grain of rice, whose resistance to electricity changes very slightly as the air around it warms or cools. The change is so small, so gradual, that no person could ever notice it happening. But the sensor notices. It always notices. It sits there, hour after hour, sensing these tiny invisible shifts in the air, the way you might slowly notice a blanket warming as you settle deeper into a bed. Some sensors report these changes in tenths of a degree, a tenth of a degree Fahrenheit at a time, not in dramatic jumps, not all at once, just slow, soft, incremental whispers of change, drifting upward or downward 1/10 of a degree after another. Imagine that for a moment. A whole building full of these tiny patient devices, each one quietly tracking temperature in increments so small they're almost a kind of stillness all on their own. Outside, on the north-facing wall of the building, away from the afternoon sun, tucked into the shade where direct sunlight never quite reaches, there's another sensor, an outdoor air sensor. Its only job is to measure the true temperature of the world outside without being fooled by the sun warming its little housing. It sits out there right now, in the cool night air, sensing the gentle drop in temperature that comes after sunset. It doesn't mind the dark. It doesn't mind being alone out there on the wall, unseen, while the building sleeps around it. It just measures quietly, faithfully, the way it always has. And deep inside one of the air ducts, those wide metal channels running invisibly through the ceiling. There's a different kind of sensor altogether, an averaging sensor. Instead of sitting at just one point, this one stretches all the way across the inside of the duct, a long, thin element reaching from one side to the other, sensing the air everywhere along its length. It does this because air moving through a duct isn't always perfectly even. Sometimes warmer air settles along one edge, cooler air along another. A gentle layering, almost like the way a pond can be warm near the surface and cool further down. The averaging sensor doesn't pick just one spot to trust. It listens to the whole width of the duct at once, blending every part of it into one smooth, honest reading. There is something soothing about that idea if you let yourself sit with it. A sensor that refuses to judge a whole airstream by just one narrow point. A sensor built entirely around the idea of gentleness, of taking the wider view, of smoothing small inconsistencies into one calm number. Further along, just past the point where outside air and return air quietly mix together inside the air handler, there's another sensor waiting. A mixed air sensor. It sits right after the dampers, those wide, slow-moving panels that decide how much fresh air from outside should blend with air pulled back in from inside the building. This sensor doesn't care where the air came from. It doesn't separate the cool night air from the warm air drifting up from an empty conference room 3 floors below. It simply measures the blend. Right at the moment the two streams come together, giving the system one steady number to work with before that air ever reaches a cooling or heating coil. You can almost picture it like 2 slow rivers meeting, one cool, one warm, swirling gently together into a single current, and a quiet little sensor standing right at the place where they merge, simply noting, here is what this air is now, together. And on a wall somewhere nearby, maybe in an office that's been empty for hours, there's a small sensor with a tiny button on its face, an override button. Someone, at some point, probably pressed it once or twice, asking for the room to be a little warmer or a little cooler just for a while. But most nights nobody touches it at all. It sits there untouched, gathering the faintest layer of dust across its plastic casing, waiting patiently for a request that may not come again for weeks. There's nothing sad about this. It isn't lonely, it's simply resting, the way most things in this building rest at night, present, ready, but unhurried. Not every temperature sensor in this building works quite the same way. Some, usually in places where precision matters more, like a server room or a laboratory space tucked somewhere on a lower floor, use something a little different, a platinum element called an RTD, instead of the small thermistor we talked about earlier. These platinum sensors aren't chosen because they're faster or flashier. They're chosen because of something much quieter, stability. Year after year, a good RTD sensor barely drifts at all from its original accuracy. It doesn't need much attention. It doesn't need much fuss. It simply keeps doing exactly what it was built to do, calmly, reliably, for a very long time. In fact, across this entire building, the temperature sensors as a whole tend to stay remarkably steady over time. A well-made sensor might drift by less than half a degree across an entire year of continuous, around-the-clock operation. Think about that for a moment. An entire year. Every single night, every single day, sensing the air without rest, and still staying almost perfectly true to where it started. There's something gently reassuring in that. A whole year passing, seasons changing, people coming and going, the building filling and emptying again and again, and still this small, quiet sensor holds its calm, faithful watch, barely wavering at all. So that's where we'll leave things for now. Right now, in this building and in countless buildings like it, all of these small temperature sensors are doing exactly what they were built to do, sensing tenths of a degree, watching the outside air cool gently as the night deepens, blending warm and cool air together into one steady reading, resting quietly under a thin layer of dust, waiting for a request that may never come tonight. None of it needs your attention. None of it needs anything from you at all. You can simply let it happen somewhere far away in the dark, the way a river keeps flowing long after you've stopped watching it. In our next chunk, we'll drift a little further into this hidden brain, past the temperature sensors toward something just as quiet. The way a building senses moisture in the air and the soft, steady pressure that holds it all gently in balance. But for now, just rest. The building is awake, so you don't have to be. Still here, still resting. Good. Let's keep drifting gently a little further into the building. Somewhere above you, inside the same quiet ductwork we were just resting beside, the air carries something else besides temperature. It carries moisture. Not much, just a little. A faint, invisible presence drifting along with every breath of air moving through the system. And just like temperature, this moisture is being watched, softly, continuously, by something that never tires of watching. The sensor responsible for this is small and humble and easy to miss if you ever happen to open up an access panel and shine a flashlight inside. Tucked into the airstream is a tiny strip of polymer film, thinner than a fingernail, and as moisture drifts past, that film slowly absorbs a little of it, or releases a little of it, depending on the air around it. As it does, something subtle changes deep inside the material, a tiny shift in its ability to hold an electrical charge. Capacitance, it's called. A quiet, invisible property, shifting by amounts far too small for any of us to imagine, let alone feel. But the sensor feels it, or rather, senses it, patiently, endlessly, the way you might sense the air growing slightly heavier just before rain without quite knowing why. This happens, right now, somewhere inside the return air path of this very kind of building, air that has already drifted through the spaces above ceiling tiles, already touched the inside of an empty office, already passed quietly over an abandoned coffee mug left on someone's desk. That air carries its own small story of moisture, and the humidity sensor reads it without judgment, without urgency. Just a number, just an observation, logged and moved on from. And here is something gently reassuring about this part of the building's hidden brain. It doesn't change quickly. A humidity reading in the return air might shift by only 1% or 2% across an entire year. A long, slow year of meetings and empty hallways and seasons turning outside the windows, and still, the air inside holds something close to a steady, familiar balance, drifting only slightly, correcting only slightly, the whole system leaning toward stillness, the way a sleeping body settles into one slow, even rhythm of breath. Let that settle for a moment. Moisture drifting, sensed, quietly, recorded calmly. Nothing demanding your attention, nothing needing to be fixed right now, just observed, And alongside moisture there's pressure, soft, invisible pressure, pushing gently through every duct in the building. If you could shrink down small enough to float inside one of these ducts right now, you'd feel barely anything at all. The air moving past you would press against your skin with a pressure of less than an inch of water, so light, so faint, that it could barely lift a single sheet of paper resting flat on a table. And yet, this faint pressure is exactly what carries warm air to a sleeping office on a cold night, or cool air to a quiet conference room in summer. Gentle, steady, barely there, and yet entirely sufficient. A sensor sits patiently along that ductwork too, sensing this pressure many times every second, checking and checking again, far faster than any of us could ever notice, smoothing out every tiny ripple of air into one calm, continuous signal. It isn't reacting to drama. There usually isn't any. It's simply tracking the soft, unhurried push of air drifting from one part of the building to another, the way a river tracks its own gentle current without ever needing to announce it. Somewhere else in this quiet system, pressure is being read in another way, not to measure airflow, but to notice something slower, something almost imperceptible. As weeks pass and dust gathers invisibly across the surface of an air filter, the air begins to find it just a little harder to pass through. Not dramatically, not suddenly, just a tiny bit more resistance day after day, building so slowly that no one walking past would ever notice a thing. But the pressure sensor notices. It watches the difference in pressure across that filter rise, almost imperceptibly, week after week, the way you might watch sand slowly fill an hourglass. There's no alarm bell ringing tonight, no flashing light, just a slow, steady climb in a number stored quietly in memory, waiting patiently until eventually someone notices it's time to replace that filter. Calm, unhurried, the way most things in this building unfold. And beyond the ducts themselves, beyond the metal and the insulation, there's a different kind of pressure being held, very gently, across the entire building itself. A pressure so soft you would never feel it standing in a doorway. And yet, it's there, quietly keeping unconditioned outside air from slipping in uninvited around the edges of doors and windows. Picture the whole building breathing out just slightly all night long, a faint outward push of air, calm and continuous, leaning gently against the outside world. Not enough to feel as a breeze, not enough to notice at all, really. Just enough to keep the building's own carefully conditioned air resting undisturbed inside, the way a closed blanket holds its warmth around you without ever needing to grip too tightly. This is what we mean when we say the building is constantly sensing and adjusting itself, not through anything urgent, not through anything loud, just this, quiet observation, gentle adjustment, repeating endlessly through the night, unnoticed by anyone sleeping nearby. Let your shoulders soften for a moment. Now let's drift towards something a little more familiar, something almost like attention itself, except this kind of attention belongs to the building. Somewhere down a long empty hallway, mounted quietly near the ceiling, there's a small white dome. Inside it, a sensor waits, sensing not sound, not light exactly, but warmth, the same gentle infrared energy radiating softly from any living body that happens to walk past. This is called a passive infrared sensor, and right now, in this hallway, it has nothing to sense at all, no warmth drifting by, no movement breaking its quiet field of view, just stillness. So the hallway lighting settles into a low, dim glow. Not dark, not alarming, just soft. The kind of light that asks nothing of anyone, simply easing back because there's no one here to need anything brighter. If someone did walk through, a security guard perhaps, making slow rounds with a flashlight clipped to their belt, that sensor would notice the change in infrared energy immediately, like a soft ripple passing across still water. The lights would rise gently to meet them, and then, once they'd passed, once the hallway returned to stillness, the sensor would wait, patiently, quietly, counting in its own slow way the minutes since it last noticed any movement at all. Most occupancy sensors are patient like this. They don't rush to declare a room empty the moment movement stops. They wait 10 minutes, sometimes 20, giving the space every gentle chance to prove someone might still be there, sitting quietly at a desk, reading something, resting without moving much at all, before finally, softly, deciding the room has settled into stillness for the night. In certain rooms, a quiet boardroom perhaps, where someone might sit reading reports for a long, motionless hour, the building uses something a little more careful, a dual technology sensor blending that same infrared awareness with a second, gentler kind of sensing. Tiny pulses of sound, far above anything human ears could ever hear, drifting invisibly through the room and listening for the soft echo of their return. Together, these two ways of sensing protect against a small, understandable mistake, declaring a room empty simply because the person inside happened to sit very, very still. There's something tender in that, if you think about it. A sensor built specifically not to be too quick to assume someone has left. High above an open office floor, a single ceiling-mounted sensor rests at the center of the room, its quiet field of detection spreading wide in every direction, covering dozens of empty desks and silent computer monitors from just one calm vantage point above. It doesn't need many eyes. Just one, wide and patient, watching over the whole space at once. And in the long, narrow hallway nearby, a different kind of sensor watches in a different shape altogether, narrow and elongated, stretched out to match the long, straight line of the corridor itself, rather than the wide-open shape of a room. Each sensor quietly fitted to the shape of the space it's meant to watch over. Nothing forced, nothing generic, just a soft, careful matching between sensor and space, repeated endlessly throughout the building, floor after floor, hallway after hallway. This, too, is part of that same quiet observation, that same gentle adjustment, the building noticing where life is and where it isn't, and adjusting itself accordingly, dimming here, easing back there, without anyone ever needing to ask it to. Now, beneath all of this sensing, beneath the humidity, the pressure, the soft awareness of occupancy drifting through hallways and offices, there is something that listens to all of it at once and quietly decides what to do next. These are the controllers. Small, unassuming devices often mounted inside metal cabinets in mechanical rooms most people never enter. If you stood in one of those rooms right now, in the dim light, you might hear nothing more than a faint electrical hum, and see here and there tiny status lights blinking at a slow, steady, even pace, on, off, a calm little heartbeat confirming, quietly, that everything inside is working exactly as it should. Each controller is responsible for a small piece of the building's hidden brain, sometimes just one mechanical room, Sometimes just one air handler, one floor, one corner of this much larger, much quieter whole. And every few seconds, without pause, without rest, each controller reaches out to its sensors, gathers their readings, compares them gently to where they're supposed to be, and decides, softly, calmly, whether anything needs to change at all. Most of the time, almost nothing does. But when something does need adjusting, the controller doesn't react sharply. It doesn't slam a valve open or a damper shut. It nudges. A fraction of a percent here, a small, careful movement there. Easing a valve open just slightly further, easing a damper closed just slightly more, the way you might gently shift your weight in bed without ever fully waking. This is something called PID control, though the name itself doesn't matter nearly as much as the feeling behind it. Small, smooth, continuous correction. Never overshooting, never rushing. Just a slow, patient narrowing of the gap between where something is and where it's supposed to be. And if, for some reason, a single sensor were to lose its way tonight, a wire loosening somewhere, a reading drifting into nonsense, the controller wouldn't panic because controllers don't know how to panic. Instead, it would quietly fall back to a safe, predictable response, the way you might instinctively pull a blanket a little higher without needing to fully wake up and think about it. A calm default, a steady fallback, nothing dramatic. Just safety, built quietly into the logic itself. All of this, every set point, every sequence, every careful little decision about how to respond, lives inside the controller's memory, the kind of memory that doesn't forget, even if the power flickers for a moment overnight. The building doesn't need to relearn itself after a brief interruption. It simply remembers, the way you might remember the shape of a familiar room even with your eyes closed. So, somewhere right now, in a mechanical room you will probably never see, a controller's status light blinks on and off and on again, in that same slow, even rhythm, confirming quietly that everything continues exactly as it should. Humidity, gently noted. Pressure, gently held. Occupancy, gently sensed. All of it gathered softly into these small, steady decisions, repeating themselves all through the night. This is the rhythm we keep returning to. Quiet observation, gentle adjustment, hidden intelligence, working without needing to be seen. Calm operation, repeating endlessly. A continuous awareness, spread quietly through walls and ceilings and hallways, never resting, never rushing, never needing anyone awake to keep it going. You don't have to hold on to any of this. You can let it drift, the way the air itself is drifting right now, somewhere above you, moving gently from one quiet space to another. In our next chunk, we'll follow that air a little further, out of the ducts and into the larger equipment that moves it. The air handlers, the chilled water systems, the wide, slow machinery working quietly together to keep this whole building breathing evenly through the night. But for now, just rest here a little longer. The building keeps its rhythm. You don't have to keep anything at all. Let's follow that air a little further now. Up above the ceiling tiles, up past the quiet hum of the building's lower floors, there's a rooftop. If you could stand there right now, in the cool night air, you'd find it strangely peaceful. No people, no noise except for a low, steady mechanical breathing coming from large metal boxes spaced quietly across the surface. These are air handling units, and right now, even with the building empty, they're still working, slowly, evenly, drawing outside air in through wide louvered openings and gently pushing it down into the building below. Inside each one, a damper sits open just a certain amount, not fully open, not fully closed, but somewhere in between, adjusted by a small patient motor responding to exactly how much fresh air the building calculates it needs right now. As the night deepens and fewer systems are calling for ventilation, that damper might ease back just slightly, opening a little less than it did at noon. Nothing sudden, nothing forced, just a slow, continuous narrowing or widening, matched moment to moment with the building's quiet, changing needs. High above an empty office floor, hidden completely from view above a row of ceiling tiles, there's something smaller. A VAV box, short for variable air volume, sitting quietly in the dark, its own small damper shifting open and closed many times every hour. Each movement is so small, so gradual, that even if you stood directly beneath it with your eyes closed, you would never feel the air change. It isn't trying to be noticed. It's simply matching airflow again and again to whatever a single quiet room happens to need at this exact moment. A little more air here, a little less there, settling, adjusting, settling again. If you let yourself imagine it, the whole building above you right now is filled with these unseen, ongoing little adjustments, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, each one so small it would never register as movement at all. Just the building, quietly coordinating comfort, far above where anyone is sleeping. On a mild night like this one, something gentle is happening at the air handler too, something called an economizer cycle. Instead of relying on mechanical cooling to chill the air, the system simply opens its outside air damper a little wider, letting the naturally cool evening air do the work instead. No compressors working hard, no refrigerant cycling under pressure, just the night itself, doing what it already does so easily, drawn in through a wide-open damper and carried gently through the ducts. There's something quietly satisfying about that. The building noticing that it doesn't need to work very hard tonight and simply not working very hard. Letting the cool air outside ease the burden on the equipment inside, resting where it can. And throughout the building, as the evening settles in further, the demands placed on heating and cooling don't disappear so much as they soften. Setback schedules ease temperature requirements gradually, a degree here, a degree there, not snapping the building into an entirely different state, but slowly relaxing it, the way your own body might slowly relax as you settle deeper into a mattress. Less strict, less demanding, simply quieter. Somewhere on a lower floor, in a conference room no one is using tonight, a small sensor continues to measure the air for something almost invisible. Carbon dioxide slowly rising whenever people gather, and breathing fills a closed room, slowly falling again once they leave. Right now, that room is empty, and the carbon dioxide levels have eased back down to their resting baseline. So the ventilation serving that space has eased back too, asking less of the system simply because there's no one there needing fresh air brought in. Demand-controlled ventilation, it's called, though really it's just another form of listening. The building noticing how many people are breathing in a space and adjusting its breath to match theirs. Down in the basement, or sometimes tucked away in a separate mechanical building entirely, the chilled water plant continues its own slow, steady rhythm. Pumps here don't run at a single fixed speed all night. Instead, they ease up or down in small increments, matching the flow of cold water to whatever the building actually needs at this hour, often far less than during a busy afternoon. A pump that might have pushed hard at 2 in the afternoon now turns gently, almost lazily, circulating just enough chilled water to keep things calm and steady through the night. Nearby, in a separate loop entirely, hot water moves through its own quiet circuit, warmed gently by a boiler that doesn't need to work as hard tonight either. On a mild evening like this, the system doesn't need scalding hot water flowing through every radiator and coil. So it resets itself, lowering the temperature of the water just slightly, asking just enough warmth to meet a gentler need, less effort, less strain, simply enough. Somewhere along that same hot water loop, a mixing valve sits quietly, blending hot water and cooler water together, not suddenly, not in a single decisive motion, but gradually, smoothing the temperature before it ever reaches a coil or a radiator. A slow blending, over and over, evening out anything that might otherwise feel abrupt. If you walk, just in your imagination, a little further from the building itself, out toward the edge of the property, you might find a cooling tower standing quietly in the dark, a soft mist of warm, faintly steaming air rising gently from its top. Its fans aren't running constantly tonight. They cycle on for a short while, then rest, then cycle on again. Short, gentle bursts, just enough to keep the water passing through it within a comfortable range. Most of the night it simply sits there, dripping softly, doing very little at all, content in the cool evening air to let the temperature settle on its own. High above, inside the same ductwork we've been following all along, the air pressure inside the supply ducts has eased back too. During the day, with dozens of VAV boxes all calling for air at once, the system needed to hold a firmer pressure to satisfy them all. But right now, with most of the building asleep, that pressure set point relaxes, just slightly lower, just gently reduced, because there's so much less being asked of it. The fans don't need to push as hard. The whole system breathes a little easier. And in certain corners of the building, places where a duct passes near an exterior wall or where outside air mixes closely with a coil carrying water, something quieter still continues its patient watch. Freeze protection. Right now, on a calm night like this, there's likely nothing to worry about. But the sensors keep checking anyway, sensing the temperature of coils and pipes, ready, if the night ever turns sharply colder than expected, to open a valve fully, letting warm water flow freely through, protecting delicate equipment from a freeze that almost certainly won't happen tonight, but might someday on some far colder night than this one. There's something comforting in that kind of vigilance. Not anxious, not urgent, just quietly prepared. The way you might keep an extra blanket folded at the foot of the bed, never needing it most nights, but resting easier simply knowing it's there. Even the supply air itself adjusts gently with the weather. On a milder day, the air leaving the handler doesn't need to be quite as cool, quite as forceful, as it would on a sweltering afternoon. So the system resets its target temperature slightly warmer, asking less of the cooling coil, avoiding the need to add unnecessary reheat afterward. A small, sensible economy, repeated quietly, day after day, season after season. And far in advance of anyone arriving tomorrow morning, long before the sun rises and the first car pulls into the parking lot, the building has already begun preparing. A morning warm-up sequence, calculated carefully based on how cool the building has become overnight and how slowly or quickly it tends to respond, begins running in the dark, well before any occupant might expect it. The building, quietly anticipating tomorrow, deciding for itself exactly when to begin warming, so that the moment the doors unlock, the air already feels gentle and welcoming, with no one ever having to know just how early that warmth began. All of this, the dampers, the pumps, the cooling towers, the reset schedules, moves together in a slow, layered coordination. Nothing about it announces itself. Nothing about it asks to be admired. It simply happens, quietly, continuously. An entire building's worth of comfort being managed without anyone needing to lift a finger or even know it's happening at all. Let yourself rest in that thought for a moment. Somewhere above you or around you, all of this is unfolding gently in the dark. Now let's drift toward something a little softer still. Light. As the sun set this evening, slowly, gradually, the sky easing from gold to a deep, quiet blue, something outside the building was watching, just as patiently as everything else we've talked about tonight. A small photocell, mounted somewhere unobtrusive, perhaps near a rooftop edge or above an entrance, sensed the natural light fading little by little, and waited for exactly the right moment to decide that dusk had truly arrived. It didn't guess. It didn't rush. It simply watched the light fall, gently, until the moment was right, and only then allowed the exterior lights to begin warming up, the way someone might wait until a room grows comfortably dim before finally turning on a soft lamp instead of overhead light. Inside, near the windows of an upper floor, a different kind of watching had been happening all afternoon. As daylight poured in earlier today, filling the space near the glass with soft, natural brightness, the lighting fixtures closest to those windows quietly dimmed themselves, step by gentle step, asking less of their own bulbs simply because the sun was doing enough of the work already. As that daylight has faded now into evening, those same fixtures have likely brightened again, slowly, in the same unhurried way they dimmed, never in a single sudden jump, just a soft fade, easing from one level to another the way a sunset itself eases color across the sky. Even the building's exterior lighting doesn't simply follow a fixed clock. Somewhere in the system, an astronomical time clock keeps a quiet, ongoing calculation, figuring out, based on the building's exact location on the Earth, precisely when sunrise and sunset will occur tonight and tomorrow and every night for the rest of the year. As the seasons shift, this calculation shifts with them, gently moving the exterior lighting schedule earlier into the afternoon as autumn deepens, and later again as spring returns. The building doesn't need anyone to update a calendar. It already knows where the sun is and where it's going. And right now, in a quiet stairwell somewhere inside the building, the lighting hasn't gone fully dark, even though no one has walked through in over an hour. Instead, it rests at a low, dim glow, enough to outline the edges of each step, enough to feel safe, even though it isn't bright enough to feel urgent or alert. If someone needed to use those stairs right now, the light would rise gently to meet them. Until then, it simply holds this soft, patient half-light, neither fully on nor fully off, content to wait in that gentle middle space. All through the building, light is behaving this way tonight, fading and brightening in slow, smooth transitions, almost never snapping suddenly from one state to another. Hallways dimming gradually as the evening deepens. Exterior lights warming softly as true dusk settles in. Stairwells resting in their low, watchful glow. Nothing harsh, nothing sudden, just gentle light, easing itself to match whatever the moment actually calls for. This, too, is the building quietly coordinating comfort, not loudly, not visibly, but through hundreds of small, soft decisions about brightness and shadow made continuously all through the night by a system that never seems to tire of paying attention. And somewhere quieter still, behind all of this, behind the dampers and the pumps and the dimming lights, the building is keeping a kind of record, a long, slow memory of everything it has done tonight. How much energy it has used, how gently its equipment has run, whether anything anywhere has drifted even slightly outside where it should be. We'll follow that part of the building next. The quiet record-keeping, the patient watching over its own performance, the soft, steady attention it pays to itself even when nothing seems to be happening at all. But for now, just let the light around you fade a little further. The building is still adjusting gently somewhere above you. You can simply let it. Somewhere in the building, in a small room you'd probably never think to enter, a single screen glows softly in the dark. It isn't loud, it isn't bright enough to disturb anything around it, just a calm, steady light. The kind that seems to belong in a quiet room at this hour. On that screen, lines drift slowly across a graph. Not jagged lines, not anything sudden, just long, smooth curves, easing gently downward as the evening deepens, the way a sigh slowly empties from a tired body settling into rest. This is the building watching itself. Not in the way a person watches something, not with worry, not with intention, just steady, patient observation, continuing quietly in the background while everyone who works here has long since gone home. Right now, somewhere on that screen, you'd see the building's overall energy use easing downward hour by hour. Fans that ran briskly in the afternoon have slowed. Lights that once filled an open office have dimmed to almost nothing. Pumps that pushed hard against a busy midday cooling load now turn over gently, asking very little of themselves. And all of this shows up not as a single dramatic drop, but as a long, gentle slope, a curve easing downward the way evening light eases into dusk, slowly, naturally, without any single moment where you could point and say, exactly there. That's when it changed. This happens every single night in countless buildings just like this one. The building settles, the graph settles with it, and somewhere a facility manager, maybe still awake at home, glancing at a laptop before bed, or maybe fast asleep already, fully trusting the building to handle tonight on its own, doesn't need to do anything at all. The curve simply continues on its own, the way it always does. Earlier today, for just a short while, this building's electrical demand briefly touched something close to its upper limit. Perhaps during a warm afternoon, when cooling equipment and lighting and computers all happened to be working hard at the very same time. For just a few minutes, the system noticed this rising demand and quietly, calmly eased back on a few non-essential loads. Maybe a portion of exterior lighting dimmed slightly earlier than usual. Maybe a piece of equipment with some flexibility in its schedule simply waited a little longer before turning on. Nothing anyone inside the building would have noticed. No flicker, no interruption, just a brief, soft easing of demand, holding everything just beneath the edge of where things might have become costly or strained. And then, once that peak had passed, once the afternoon's demand began naturally easing on its own, those same loads were quietly allowed to return to normal, exactly as gently as they'd been set aside. A small temporary pause, nothing more. If something more significant had needed to happen, if demand had risen further, asking even more of the system, the building wouldn't have reached for everything at once. It would have stepped through its choices carefully, the way someone deciding which lights to turn off in an unfamiliar house might start with the least important ones first, saving anything essential for last, only reaching further if it truly had to. This kind of staged, careful response is part of what we mean when we talk about the building quietly watching itself. Not reacting in a panic, not making sweeping changes all at once, just calm, layered decisions, each one only as large as it needs to be, and no larger. Even now, long before tomorrow morning arrives, something is already quietly calculating when it should begin warming the building back up. Not based on a fixed clock, not simply start at 5 a.m. every day, but something more thoughtful than that, comparing tonight's outside temperature to past nights, remembering how slowly or quickly this particular building tends to respond, and deciding calmly on its own the precise moment heating should begin so that comfort arrives exactly when it's needed, without wasting a single unnecessary minute warming an empty building too early. This is sometimes called an optimal start, though really it's simply patience expressed as math. The building quietly reasoning its way toward the gentlest possible beginning to tomorrow. If you could look more closely at that softly glowing screen in the electrical room, you might notice that the building's energy isn't shown as just one single number. It's broken apart, gently, into smaller streams, one for each floor, sometimes one for each major system. This is called submetering, and it lets someone curious enough to look see, very specifically, how quietly the third floor is resting tonight compared to the rest of the building. A floor that held dozens of people earlier today, now drawing almost nothing. Each stream of energy watched on its own, separately, as if the building were made of many small, individually breathing rooms rather than one single whole. And down at the electrical panel itself, the wide metal cabinet humming faintly in that same quiet room, small monitoring devices continue their own steady watch over the power flowing through each circuit. If, for some reason, a single piece of equipment kept running longer than its schedule intended, a fan left on by mistake perhaps, somewhere on a floor that should have gone quiet hours ago, this is exactly the kind of small inconsistency these monitors are built to notice. Not urgently, not with any drama, just a quiet flag, gently raised, waiting patiently for someone to eventually take a look. All of this, the easing curves, the careful staging, the quiet comparisons between floors, exists for one simple calming reason, so that nothing in this building works harder than it truly needs to. Not because anyone is demanding savings, just because, given the choice, the building always leans toward doing only as much as is actually necessary and resting the rest of the time. Now, let's slow down even further and look at how this building remembers. Every few minutes, sometimes every 5, sometimes every 15, a quiet measurement is taken somewhere and stored gently away. a duct temperature, a humidity reading, the position of a single damper easing open or closed. None of these measurements feel important in the moment they're taken. They're small, quiet, almost forgettable. But taken together, minute after minute, hour after hour, they form something larger, a slow, patient record of everything this building has done. This is called a trend log, and it behaves a little like a diary the building keeps about itself, written not in words, but in numbers, recorded continuously, without ever needing to be asked. If you opened one of these trend logs right now, late on this particular night, and looked at the graph of a single office's temperature over the past several hours, you would likely see something almost soothing in its plainness. A long, nearly flat line, no sharp peaks, no sudden valleys, just a calm, steady ribbon drawn quietly across the screen, hour after hour, as the controller in that space made its tiny, continuous adjustments, holding everything gently in place. Some buildings keep these records for months at a time, allowing someone curious enough to compare tonight's quiet behavior to a similar night a year ago. Perhaps a night just as mild, just as calm, with the building behaving in nearly the same patient way it's behaving right now. There's something almost comforting in that kind of continuity. The building quietly repeating its own rhythms, season after season, the way familiar lullabies repeat the same gentle phrases each time they're sung. In some systems, even smaller details are kept, not just temperature and humidity, but the position of individual valves and dampers throughout the night. If you traced one of these logs carefully, you could watch in slow motion every tiny adjustment a single controller made over an 8-hour stretch, easing a valve open a few percent, holding steady for a while, easing it closed again slightly as conditions shifted. None of these movements would have meant anything on their own, but recorded together, they tell the quiet story of one small part of the building gently tending to itself all night long. And sometimes the real value of all this quiet record-keeping only reveals itself across many nights at once, not in a single graph, but in a slow pattern stretched across a week or a month. A set point that has, almost invisibly, drifted slightly from where it once was, a piece of equipment running just a little longer each night than it did a season ago. Nothing dramatic enough to notice in any single moment. Just a slow, gentle drift, the kind that only becomes visible when you're patient enough to look back across many quiet nights in a row. This, too, is part of what it means for a building to watch itself. Not just in this moment, but across all the moments that came before it, gathering them gently together into a long, quiet history, written one small measurement at a time. And resting quietly beside all of this, beside the trend logs, beside the energy graphs, there is one more layer of attention, a layer that most nights says absolutely nothing at all. This is the building's alarm system, and on a calm night like tonight it has nothing to report. Not every small deviation matters equally. A space drifting half a degree away from set point for a few minutes is treated very differently than a major piece of equipment failing outright. The building's alarm system understands this difference, sorting every possible alert into different levels of priority. Some quiet enough to simply note and move past, others serious enough to deserve immediate attention should they ever actually occur. Many alarms are also given a small, deliberate delay before they're allowed to speak up at all. If a temperature briefly wanders outside its expected range, just for a moment, just for a passing minute, the system waits patiently to see whether it settles back on its own before ever raising any concern. Most of the time it does. Most fluctuations are brief, harmless, and resolve themselves quietly, without ever needing anyone's attention at all. If something more meaningful did happen tonight, truly happen, not just a passing flicker, the alarm wouldn't ring out loudly through empty hallways. There's no siren waiting to disturb this stillness. Instead, the notification would travel quietly outward through a simple page or a brief email, reaching someone far away, long before anyone inside the building itself ever needed to wake up and notice. A well-tuned alarm system, in fact, spends most of its night saying absolutely nothing. Night after night, it simply watches, quietly, patiently, allowing the building to rest undisturbed because there's truly nothing that needs attention. This silence isn't emptiness. It's a kind of quiet diligence, the alarm system fully present, fully ready, simply finding, again and again, that tonight isn't a night it needs to speak. And when something does eventually happen, weeks from now, perhaps, or months, the alarm system won't just record that single moment of concern, it will also record exactly when everything returned to normal again, closing that small story gently, the way a held breath is finally allowed to release. So somewhere right now, in that same quiet electrical room, beneath the soft glow of that one steady screen, the building continues watching itself, its energy easing downward in long, smooth curves, its trend logs filling quietly, minute by minute, with the soft, ordinary details of an uneventful night, its alarms resting in patient silence, ready but not needed. All of this happens without anyone standing here to see it. And yet, none of it is unwatched exactly. It's simply being watched in a different way, softly, continuously, recorded rather than observed, remembered rather than reacted to. In our next chunk, we'll follow this awareness even further outward, past the walls of this single building entirely, toward the quiet networks and remote connections that let someone, somewhere far away, gently look in on all of this without ever needing to leave their own home. But for now, let the curves on that screen keep easing downward. The building remembers everything it needs to. You don't have to remember anything at all. Far away from this building right now, across town, maybe, or in another city entirely, someone is lying in bed, almost asleep, with a phone resting on the nightstand beside them. If they wanted to, they could reach over right now, unlock that phone, and see this exact building. Not by walking through it, not by standing in that quiet electrical room we just left, just by looking, softly, remotely, at the very same trend graphs, the very same gentle curves easing downward that anyone standing inside the building could see for themselves. This is one of the quieter gifts of a building like this one. Its awareness doesn't stay locked inside its own walls. It reaches outward, gently, through invisible threads of connection, letting someone far away rest just as easily as someone standing right beside the equipment. If for some reason a single set point needed adjusting tonight, maybe a room reported slightly warmer than expected, nothing serious, just enough to warrant a small correction, an engineer could simply reach for that same phone, glance at the reading, and adjust it themselves, gently, from wherever they happen to be. No drive across town in the middle of the night, no fumbling for keys in a dark parking lot. Just a small, calm action taken from the comfort of their own bed, and the building, somewhere far away, quietly receiving that instruction and adjusting accordingly. And if an alarm had spoken up earlier tonight, even one of the quiet, low-priority kind we talked about before, that same engineer could look at it now calmly from a distance. They could review what led up to it. Trace the trend log backward an hour, 2 hours, watching the gentle curve that came before the alert, deciding thoughtfully whether this is something that truly needs someone to visit in person, or simply something to acknowledge softly and let continue resolving on its own. Most of the time, it's the second one. Most of the time, the building has already begun settling itself back into place before anyone even finishes reading the alert. All of this happens through a quiet, steady exchange of information, often passing first through something distant and intangible, a cloud-connected system, gathering up this building's entire day, hour by hour, and sending it upward at scheduled intervals, the way a slow tide gently carries something out to sea and back again. The building doesn't need to announce this happening. It simply happens, automatically, again and again, day after day, sinking its quiet history outward without ever needing anyone to ask it to. Now, let's drift even closer. Let's go inside the walls of this building, into the space between devices where none of this remote watching would even be possible without something quieter still, the way these systems actually talk to each other. Picture for a moment every sensor, every controller, every air handler and lighting panel and energy meter in this building. Each one sitting in its own quiet location, each one sensing or deciding something small and specific. None of them are truly separate from each other. They're connected, gently, invisibly, by a network running through the walls, carrying small, steady messages back and forth all night long. Much of this conversation happens using something called BACnet, a quiet, shared language that lets equipment built by entirely different manufacturers still understand each other perfectly. A temperature sensor made by one company, a controller made by another, an air handler from somewhere else entirely. None of that matters in the end, because they've all learned to speak the same calm, simple language, allowing them to share information as easily as if they'd always been designed to work side by side. Some of these conversations travel over a kind of network called BACnet MS/TP, a modest, unhurried connection running over simple twisted pair wiring, nothing fast or flashy, nothing that needs to be fast or flashy. Building control has never needed urgency. A message that arrives in a fraction of a second is more than quick enough for a system whose decisions unfold gradually, gently, over minutes rather than instants. If you could somehow listen in on this network right now, not with your ears, but in some quieter, more imaginative way, you might picture small packets of information drifting calmly along these wires, one after another, like slow, steady ripples moving across still water. A temperature reading here, a damper position there, a status update confirming that yes, everything continues exactly as expected. None of these messages are large. None of them are urgent. The entire network carries only a small fraction of the information that a typical office computer network might carry in the same moment, just enough, exactly enough, for slow, careful coordination. In some parts of the building, older equipment speaks a slightly different language altogether, perhaps something called Modbus or LawnWorks. technologies installed years ago, quietly continuing to do their job long after they were first put in place. Rather than replacing this older equipment, the building simply introduces a small translator called a gateway, sitting quietly between networks, gently converting one language into another so that old systems and new systems can still understand each other perfectly, despite having been born years apart. There's something soothing in that idea if you sit with it for a moment. Nothing here gets left behind simply because it's older. The building finds a way to let every voice, every dialect continue being heard, gently translated into something everyone else can understand. And this entire network, this quiet web of communication threading through walls and ceilings, never really stops. Even now, at this exact moment, with almost no one awake inside this building, small updates continue passing back and forth. A controller confirming its own steady state, a sensor offering its latest gentle reading. None of it urgent enough to wake anyone, none of it quiet enough to ever fully stop. Just an ongoing, continuous murmur of information, drifting steadily through the building's invisible nervous system, hour after hour, all through the night. A single section of this network might be responsible for dozens of devices at once: sensors, controllers, small actuators tucked above ceiling tiles. And yet, even with all of them speaking at once, the overall traffic remains light, calm, unhurried, because none of these devices are competing for attention. They're simply taking turns, gently, sharing small pieces of information exactly when needed, and resting quietly in between. Now let's drift toward something a little larger still. The way these separate conversations sometimes grow into something more connected. Something we call, gently, a smart building. In many buildings like this one, the systems we've talked about across this entire story, temperature, lighting, security, ventilation, don't simply operate beside each other. They begin slowly to operate together, as if learning to share a single unified sense of awareness rather than each minding only its own small corner of the world. Picture, again, that quiet occupancy sensor we visited earlier, resting above an empty hallway. On its own, it simply notices that no one has walked past in the last 15 minutes. But in a more deeply connected building, that same simple observation doesn't stay isolated to lighting alone. It ripples outward, gently, into other systems too. Ventilation in that section might ease back, just slightly, recognizing that fewer people means less need for fresh air right now. The building isn't making two separate decisions anymore. It's making one quiet decision, shared calmly across several systems at once. If you could see this kind of building represented visually, and somewhere, right now, there likely is a screen showing exactly this, you wouldn't see complicated charts or dense technical readouts. You'd see something far calmer, a simple floor plan perhaps, dotted here and there with small, soft icons, a pale blue icon for an air handler quietly cycling, a small light bulb shape dimmed beside an empty hallway. Nothing alarming, nothing demanding immediate attention. Just a gentle visual representation of dozens of real systems, simplified into shapes calm enough to glance at right before falling asleep yourself. And underneath that calm visual surface, something quieter still continues working. A kind of software some buildings use that simply watches how equipment is expected to behave and gently compares that against how it's actually behaving. Most nights these two pictures match closely, almost perfectly, and nothing more needs to happen. But every so often a small inefficiency reveals itself, a fan running just a little longer than it should, a valve not quite closing as fully as expected, something far too subtle to notice in passing but visible eventually to a system built entirely around careful, patient comparison. This is sometimes called fault detection, though the name feels a little more serious than the actual experience of it. Mostly, it isn't about catching something broken. It's about noticing gently, long before anything truly breaks, that something has begun drifting just slightly away from where it should be, offering enough quiet warning that someone eventually can ease it back into place before it ever becomes a real problem at all. Some of these more connected buildings reach outward even further than their own networks, out past their walls entirely, toward tomorrow's weather forecast, gathered quietly from somewhere far beyond the property line. If tomorrow is expected to turn unusually warm, the building might begin cooling itself down a little earlier than usual tonight, easing ahead of the heat before it ever arrives, the way you might pull a lighter blanket over yourself in anticipation of a warmer night to come. None of this requires anyone to check the forecast themselves. The building has already quietly absorbed that information and adjusted its own plans accordingly. All of this, the shared occupancy data, the calm visual dashboards, the patient fault detection, the quiet weather-driven adjustments, represents something larger than any single sensor or controller we've talked about so far. A kind of gentle, distributed intelligence spread evenly across an entire building, communicating quietly within itself, constantly comparing, constantly adjusting, never needing to raise its voice to do any of it. If you listen closely enough, not with your ears, but with your imagination, you might almost picture this whole building as something like a body, resting quietly in the dark. Its sensors, like nerve endings scattered throughout walls and ceilings. Its controllers, like small clusters of quiet thought, gathering information and deciding gently what to do next. Its networks, like the slow, steady pulse of communication running between every part of the whole. Nothing urgent, nothing forceful, just a calm, continuous conversation happening everywhere at once beneath a surface that, from the outside, looks perfectly still. And as we sit with that image for a moment, this enormous, sleeping body of steel and wire and quiet electricity, something else becomes clear too. The night itself has been deepening all along, hasn't it? Hour by hour, as we've drifted through sensors and dampers and pumps and networks, the building around us has been settling further and further into its own particular kind of stillness. Soon we'll rest there with it. In the quietest part of the night, when almost every system has eased into its gentlest possible state, fans barely turning, lights barely glowing, controllers simply holding steady, watching, waiting, asking very little of anything around them. That's where we're headed next, into the deepest, calmest part of this building's night, into the long, slow hours when nighttime operation isn't just one part of the story, but becomes gently the entire story itself. But for now, just rest here a little longer, inside this quiet hum of invisible conversation. Somewhere, small messages are still drifting through the walls around you. You don't need to hear them. You only need to rest. The night has deepened now. If you could walk through this building right now, quietly, slowly, the way you might tiptoe past a sleeping room you didn't want to wake, you would notice that almost everything has settled even further than before. The hallways are darker now, lit only by the soft, steady glow of exit signs near the stairwells, their small red letters glowing patiently, the way they always do, whether anyone is there to see them or not. The air feels still, though if you listened closely enough you might just barely hear the faint, distant breath of a fan somewhere far above, turning slowly, unhurried, in no rush to be anywhere else. This is what we mean by unoccupied mode. Somewhere, hours ago, as the last few people gathered their things and walked quietly out into the evening, the building noticed. Not in any dramatic way, just gently, gradually, as occupancy sensors across the floors stopped sensing any movement at all and held that stillness long enough to feel confident the day was truly over. And so the air handlers eased back. Fans that once moved briskly through the afternoon now turn at a fraction of their daytime speed, sometimes resting almost completely, only stirring again if a space drifts further from its set point than the building is willing to allow. During the day, comfort means holding tightly to a single, precise number. But at night, the building loosens its grip just slightly, allowing temperatures in empty offices to drift a few degrees in either direction before bothering to respond at all. There's no one there to notice the difference. So why work hard to prevent something no one will ever feel? On a warm summer night like this one, something else might be happening too, somewhere up on the rooftop. A night purge cycle, drawing in cool outside air through wide-open dampers, flushing gently through the building's ductwork, carrying away the heat that built up quietly in walls and furniture and ceiling tiles throughout a long, sunny day. By morning, the whole structure will feel a little cooler than it would have otherwise, simply because the night air was allowed to drift through it, unhurried, for a few quiet hours while no one was here to notice. Outside, in the parking lot and along the walkways, the lighting has eased back too. Earlier this evening, exterior fixtures glowed at their full evening brightness, guiding the last few employees safely to their cars. But now, with that last car long gone, the lighting has dimmed further still. Not dark, never fully dark, just softened, gradually, the way a room settles into shadow as a lamp is slowly turned down rather than switched off all at once. Somewhere in a security office, perhaps staffed by a single quiet guard reviewing a wall of small monitors, or perhaps entirely unstaffed and monitored only by distant software, the building's security system and its automation system continue their own quiet exchange of information. If a door were to unlock itself after hours, perhaps a maintenance worker arriving briefly to check on something, or perhaps something less expected, that small event wouldn't stay isolated. The ventilation system nearby might be gently asked to take a closer look at conditions in that area, just in case. The way you might glance instinctively toward a sound in another room. Not from worry exactly, just quiet attentiveness. Down in the building's elevator shafts, movement has slowed too. During the day, elevators rushed busily between floors, often running several cars at once to keep up with a steady flow of people. Tonight, only one or two remain active, moving more slowly between calls, content to let a longer wait pass between floors, since there's so rarely anyone waiting at all. If someone did need to use one right now, security making rounds perhaps, or a technician arriving for a late repair. The elevator would still answer, just a little less hurriedly than it would during a busy afternoon. Even water itself has begun resting differently tonight. Somewhere in the building's plumbing, a recirculation pump that spent the day keeping hot water readily available at every faucet has slowed or paused entirely, simply because no one is standing at a sink right now waiting for warm water to arrive. And in the mechanical room nearby, the domestic hot water tank itself has been allowed to ease back its temperature set point just slightly. Not a meaningful drop, nothing anyone would notice if they did happen to wash their hands at this hour, just a small, sensible easing of effort, trimming away a little unnecessary heat loss through the long, quiet hours until morning. Beneath the building, in the parking garage, fans that move air through that long concrete space aren't running constantly either. Instead, small sensors quietly watch for carbon monoxide, waiting patiently for any sign that exhaust from a car has begun building up. Most of the night, with the garage as empty as the offices above it, there's nothing for those sensors to notice at all, and the fans simply rest, conserving their effort for a moment that, tonight, likely won't come. All of this, the slower elevators, the resting recirculation pumps, the quietly cycling garage fans, belongs to the same gentle pattern we've been following the whole night through. The building isn't simply switching itself off in pieces. It's easing thoughtfully into a version of itself that asks only as much as the moment actually requires, and not a single bit more. Let's slow down even further now and notice a few smaller, quieter details, the kind of things that rarely get mentioned at all, simply because they work so quietly, so consistently, that no one ever has reason to think about them. Somewhere on an upper floor, in an office that has held its temperature steady for hours now, the air feels exactly the same as it did when the last person left this evening. Not because nothing has happened in that room since then. Plenty has happened quietly, continuously. But because the VAV system serving that space has done its job so smoothly, so consistently, that the room has barely wavered by more than half a degree the entire time. Small adjustments, made constantly, are often the very reason a space feels like nothing is happening to it at all. Inside the walls themselves, the simple cables connecting all of these sensors back to their controllers are often shielded, wrapped in a thin layer of protective material specifically designed to keep faint electrical interference from nearby power lines out of the way. It's a small, easily overlooked detail, but it's part of why a sensor's reading stays so calm and steady, undisturbed by the electrical hum of the very building it lives inside. Once or twice a year, someone will walk through this building with a small calibration tool, checking each sensor gently against a known reference, confirming quietly that everything is still reading exactly as it should. It isn't an urgent task, it isn't treated with any particular drama, just a slow occasional ritual repeated patiently season after season, keeping this whole hidden brain honest with itself. Down in the chiller plant, especially on a calm night like this one, the equipment doesn't run anywhere close to its full capacity. Most of the building's significant cooling need happens during the busy stretch of a working afternoon. Tonight, with so few systems calling for cold water at all, the chiller plant simply idles along at a fraction of what it's capable of, asking very little of itself, content to provide just enough. And throughout the building, wherever a motor needs to turn, a fan, a pump, anything large enough to feel a jolt if started too quickly. A variable frequency drive eases it gently up to speed instead, the way you might slowly press down on a car's accelerator rather than stomping on it all at once. Smooth, gradual, kind to the equipment itself, never asking it to lurch suddenly into motion when a soft, steady ramp will do the job just as well. If a meeting happened to take place earlier this evening, in a conference room now sitting completely empty, you could trace its presence even now, faintly, through the room's carbon dioxide levels. They rose slowly while people gathered there, breathing quietly together for an hour, and they've been falling just as slowly ever since everyone left, easing gradually back toward their resting baseline, like a held breath finally and fully released. Near that same ceiling, a return air sensor continues its own quiet observation, not of one single point in the room, but of the room's air as a whole, gathered together as it rises and drifts toward the grill above. It senses, in a sense, the room's entire shared breath, rather than any one isolated corner of it. In the boiler room, if more heat were ever needed tonight than a single boiler could comfortably provide, a second one would join in, not all at once, not abruptly, but staged carefully, brought online only once the lead boiler truly couldn't keep up on its own. Most nights, especially mild ones like tonight, that second boiler never needs to wake up at all. It simply waits, ready, resting in its own quiet stillness alongside everything else. And somewhere nearby, inside a metal shell easy to walk past without a second glance, a heat exchanger continues its own invisible work, passing warmth from one loop of water to another, never letting the two fluids actually touch or mix, simply allowing their heat to move quietly between them, like two hands almost touching through a thin, warm pane of glass. Even the largest motors in the building, the ones responsible for moving the most air or the most water, don't ever simply snap on at full strength. They ease into motion across several gentle seconds, a soft start sequence smoothing what could otherwise feel like a sudden jolt into something closer to a slow, steady waking. And quietly, behind every part of this entire hidden brain, sits something we haven't mentioned yet tonight, an uninterruptible power supply, waiting patiently in case the building's electricity were ever to flicker or fail, even for a moment. If it did, this quiet backup would simply continue supplying power to the building's controllers and network, so seamlessly that the building's careful logic would never even notice the interruption at all. The thinking continues, the remembering continues. Nothing about this hidden brain ever truly goes dark, even in the rare moment the rest of the building briefly might. If someone were to glance at this building's trend logs tomorrow morning, reviewing the quiet night that has just unfolded, they would likely find very little to comment on. Just a handful of smooth, easy curves, rising and falling gently across the hours, evidence of a night that asked very little of anyone, and was met with exactly that much in return. So here we are, late in the night, walking, in our imagination, through this same quiet building one final time before we let it rest completely, and let ourselves rest along with it. Think, for a moment, about everything we've wandered through together tonight. Somewhere behind these walls, temperature sensors continue their small, patient watch. Tiny thermistors sensing tenths of a degree, platinum elements holding steady year after year, an averaging sensor stretched gently across the width of a duct, blending every part of the airstream into one calm, honest number. Somewhere nearby, humidity drifts quietly through return air, sensed by a thin strip of polymer film too small to ever notice on its own, and pressure holds its gentle, invisible balance, barely enough to lift a single sheet of paper, and yet entirely enough to keep this whole building breathing evenly through the dark. Occupancy sensors rest in their long patience, waiting 10 minutes, 20 minutes before ever deciding a room has truly emptied, careful never to assume too quickly that a still, quiet person has actually left. And underneath all of it, controllers continue their endless, gentle questioning, checking every few seconds whether anything needs the smallest of adjustments, nudging a valve, easing a damper, falling back calmly to safety if ever a single sensor loses its way, never panicking, never needing to. Lighting dims and brightens in slow, smooth fades, matched gently to daylight, matched gently to movement, matched gently to the quiet astronomical rhythm of sunrise and sunset, drifting slowly through the changing seasons outside. Air handlers high above continue drawing breath in and pushing breath out, their dampers easing open and closed by fractions of a degree, their economizers reaching for cool night air instead of mechanical effort whenever the evening allows it. Energy curves ease downward hour after hour, recorded quietly on a softly glowing screen in a room no one is standing in right now. Trend logs gather their slow, patient record minute by minute, the same way they have every single night this building has ever known. And alarms rest in their patient silence, ready, but, tonight at least, entirely unneeded. And quietly, underneath even that, small packets of information continue drifting through the building's invisible network, sensor to controller, controller to air handler, one small, steady message after another, an unseen conversation that never really stops, even now, even this deep into the night. All of it together. All of these small, separate, quiet attentions woven into one continuous, gentle whole, a hidden brain spread evenly through walls and ceilings and rooftop equipment, asking for nothing, expecting nothing, simply continuing. You don't have to hold on to any of it. Let the hallways stay dark, lit only by their soft red exit signs. Let the air keep moving gently through the ducts above you, unseen, unheard, exactly as it should. Let the small status lights in some distant mechanical room keep blinking, steady and even, confirming quietly, again and again, that everything continues exactly as it's meant to. Let the trend graphs keep drawing their long, smooth lines across a screen no one needs to watch right now. Somewhere, this building will keep its rhythm without you. It always has. It always will, tonight and tomorrow night, and every quiet night after that. Sensors sensing, controllers adjusting, networks softly murmuring, all of it continuing gently, patiently, until the very first light of morning finds its way back through the windows. You can let go now. You don't need to keep watch over anything at all. The building already has. Rest now. Sleep well. Let's begin again, gently, from the very start of an evening. Somewhere, right now, the sun is easing down toward the horizon outside a quiet commercial office building. The sky is turning that soft, fading gold it always turns at this hour, sliding slowly into a deeper blue, and inside the building almost no one notices the exact moment it happens. They're finishing emails, gathering bags, saying quiet goodnights to co-workers heading for the elevator. But outside, on a rooftop ledge, a small photocell is noticing everything. It has been watching the light fall patiently for the last hour, waiting for the moment the brightness drops low enough to confirm that evening has truly arrived. This is where our night begins. Let's move through it slowly together, hour by hour, the way the building itself moves through it, without rushing, without urgency, simply easing from one quiet state into the next. It's early evening now, somewhere around 6 o'clock. Most of the offices on the upper floors have emptied, though a few lit windows remain, scattered here and there, marking the last few people still finishing their day. The building hasn't shifted into its nighttime rhythm yet. It's still watching patiently, waiting to see whether the day has truly ended, or whether it's simply pausing for a moment before more people arrive again. Inside, occupancy sensors continue their quiet observation, room by room. Most have already gone 10, 15 minutes without sensing anyone, and so gently the lighting in those spaces has begun to dim. Not dramatically, just a soft easing downward, the brightness lowering in small increments, the way a candle's flame might settle after being trimmed, calm and unhurried. Outside, that photocell has finally made its decision. The light has fallen far enough now, dusk has arrived, and so, quietly, without any fanfare, the building's exterior lights begin to warm up, not all at once, but gradually, rising softly from darkness into a gentle glow that will guide the last few cars safely out of the parking lot. By 7 o'clock, the building feels different already. Almost everyone is gone. A few cars remain in the parking lot, but even those are thinning now. Somewhere on the ground floor, a cleaning crew has begun their rounds, moving methodically from one dark office to the next, their presence registered briefly by motion sensors that brighten just long enough to light their way, then settle quietly back into dimness once they've moved on. This is when the building truly begins to change. Air handlers that work steadily through the afternoon, keeping dozens of separate offices comfortable for dozens of separate people, each with their own slightly different preference for warmth or coolness, begin easing back now, their fans slowing, their dampers adjusting to ask less of themselves. The controllers overseeing each zone have started loosening their grip on the day's tight, precise set points, allowing temperatures to drift a little more freely than they were permitted to drift just an hour ago. It's 8 o'clock now. The cleaning crew has moved up a floor, their flashlights and cartwheels the only sounds echoing faintly through otherwise silent hallways. The building has settled fully into what's sometimes called unoccupied mode, a calmer, more forgiving version of itself, content to let things drift gently rather than holding everything rigidly in place. If you could see a trend graph of any single office right now, you'd notice its temperature line beginning to soften, no longer pinned tightly to one exact number, but easing slowly, almost imperceptibly, the way a held muscle finally begins to relax after a long day of tension. 9 o'clock arrives quietly. The cleaning crew has finished the upper floors and moved down toward the lobby, nearly done for the night. Outside, traffic on the nearby street has thinned to almost nothing. Inside the building's small security office, a guard glances at a wall of monitors, none of them showing anything unusual, just dark, still hallways lit faintly by the same soft exit signs that will stay lit all night long. glowing patiently in their corners no matter how late it gets. Somewhere behind those same walls, the building's network continues its own quiet conversation, sensors and controllers exchanging small, steady updates exactly as they have all day, only now, with so much less happening throughout the building, those updates have become simpler, calmer, mostly just gentle confirmations that nothing much has changed since the last check, and nothing much needs to. By 10 o'clock, the last car has left the parking lot. The cleaning crew's van pulls away from the loading dock, taillights fading into the dark street beyond. The building, for the first time tonight, is completely empty of people. And yet, of course, it isn't truly alone. Sensors continue sensing. Controllers continue adjusting. Somewhere in a mechanical room, a single status light blinks steadily, confirming, the way it always does, that everything continues exactly as it should. The exterior lighting has settled into its lowest scheduled level now. Not dark, never fully dark, just dimmed enough to match the simple fact that no one needs to be guided safely to a car anymore tonight. Astronomical calculations made earlier determined exactly when this transition should happen, based on tonight's specific date, adjusting itself slightly earlier or later depending on the season, without anyone needing to remember to change a single setting by hand. It's 11 o'clock, and somewhere a few miles away, an engineer who oversees this building among several others glances briefly at a laptop before turning in for the night herself. She doesn't need to drive over and check on anything in person. The same trend graphs available to anyone standing inside the building are available to her too, glowing softly on her screen at home. Everything looks calm. Long, smooth, gently sloping lines. Nothing demanding her attention tonight. She closes the laptop, satisfied, and goes to sleep, trusting the building to handle the rest of the night on its own, exactly as it always does. Midnight passes quietly, the way midnight usually does in a building like this, without ceremony, without anyone marking the moment at all. The HVAC system has settled into its deepest overnight rhythm now. Fans turning at their slowest comfortable speed. Dampers holding steady, adjusting only occasionally in small fractional movements whenever a zone's temperature wanders further than its loosened nighttime boundary allows. If it's a warm summer night, something else might be happening on the rooftop right now too. A night purge cycle perhaps, drawing in the cool midnight air and letting it drift gently through the building's ductwork, flushing away heat that gathered quietly in walls and ceilings throughout yesterday's sunlit afternoon. By the time morning arrives, the building will feel a little cooler inside than it otherwise would have, simply because the night was allowed for a few hours to do some of tomorrow's work in advance. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. The hours begin to blur together now, the way late, deep night always does, each one nearly indistinguishable from the one before it. The building's trend logs continue recording everything in small, patient increments, a temperature reading every few minutes, a damper position quietly noted, a humidity level logged and then logged again, slightly different, slightly the same. None of it dramatic, all of it simply accumulating, slowly, into the long, smooth history this building keeps of its own quiet existence. Somewhere around 2:30 perhaps, a single low-priority alert might briefly flicker somewhere in the system, a space drifting just slightly further from its loosened nighttime range than expected. The alarm system notices, waits the few patient minutes built into its programming to see whether the deviation resolves on its own, and, more often than not, watches it ease quietly back into range without ever needing to escalate any further. No one wakes up. No one needs to. The building handled it exactly the way it was designed to, quietly, on its own. It's 3 o'clock now, the deepest, stillest part of the night. If you stood in the lobby right now, you might hear almost nothing at all, just the faint, distant hum of equipment far above, barely audible, more a feeling than a sound. The building has reached its calmest possible state, asking almost nothing of itself, content simply to exist quietly until morning eventually arrives. And yet, even now, something is already beginning to think about that morning. Somewhere in a controller's memory, a calculation has already been made, comparing tonight's outside temperature to the patterns of past nights, considering how quickly or slowly this particular building tends to respond to a request for warmth, and arriving calmly at a precise moment when morning warm-up should begin. Not too early, wasting unnecessary energy heating an empty building hours before anyone arrives. Not too late, leaving the first employees through the door to feel a chill that shouldn't have been there at all. It's 4 o'clock now, and that calculated moment has arrived. Quietly, without any visible change at all from outside the building, the heating system begins to stir. A valve opens just slightly. A fan, which had been resting at its lowest overnight speed, begins to turn a little more purposefully. None of this announces itself. There's no one here yet to notice. It simply begins patiently the way a kettle begins warming long before anyone walks into the kitchen to use it. By 5 o'clock, the eastern sky outside has only just begun to soften from black toward the faintest hint of deep blue. Inside, the building continues its slow warming, room by room, floor by floor, each zone's controller easing its own local temperature gently upward, calculated independently for that specific space's particular needs. A corner office that cools faster overnight might begin warming a little earlier than a more sheltered interior room. Each part of the building, quietly tended to according to its own particular rhythm. Outside, that same patient photocell from the beginning of our story is beginning to notice something different now. The faintest trace of returning daylight, gathering almost imperceptibly along the horizon. It isn't ready to declare morning has arrived, not yet, but it's watching the way it always watches, patiently waiting for the moment the light becomes undeniable. It's nearly 6 o'clock now. Somewhere on the building's east-facing side, daylight has begun spilling gently through the windows of upper floors, and the lighting fixtures nearest those windows have begun very slightly to dim themselves in response, content to let the rising sun do a small portion of their work for them, just as it has every morning before this one. The parking lot, still empty for now, is gradually losing the deep shadows of night, the exterior lighting easing itself down in response to that same gathering daylight, the astronomical calculation from the evening before now working in reverse, gently fading the lights it brightened 12 hours earlier. And somewhere inside, the morning warm-up sequence that began so quietly back at 4 o'clock has done its patient work well. By the time the first car pulls back into the parking lot, an early arrival, perhaps someone wanting a quiet head start before the rest of the office fills in, the temperature inside already feels exactly as it should, comfortable, settled, as though the building had simply always been this way, with no visible evidence at all of the long, careful transition that brought it here. The night is ending now, the way it always does. Not abruptly, but as one long, gentle exhale, easing from darkness back into daylight, from stillness back into gradual gathering activity. Somewhere, the trend logs from this entire night are already complete, waiting patiently to be reviewed by someone, eventually, who will likely find nothing more remarkable in them than a series of long, smooth curves rising and falling exactly where they were expected to. That engineer, miles away, will probably never even think to check. She doesn't need to. The building did exactly what it always does, the same patient, careful transition it makes every single night, whether anyone is watching or not. And so the cycle completes itself once more, sunset easing into evening, evening easing into the deep, quiet hours of night, night easing, finally, gently, back toward morning. A long, slow breath taken by an entire building, held through the darkest hours, and released softly as the first true daylight returns. You don't need to remember any particular hour of this. You can simply let the whole night drift past you, the way it drifted past the building itself. One slow, easy transition after another, asking nothing of you at all. Just rest now, somewhere in the middle of that long, quiet night. The morning will come on its own. Let's take a slower walk tonight. Not through the hours of the night this time, but through the rooms themselves, one quiet space after another, pausing in each one just long enough to notice what's watching over it, and how gently it does that watching. We'll start where most people start, the lobby. It's empty right now, of course. The chairs near the entrance sit exactly where they were left this afternoon, angled slightly toward each other as if mid-conversation. A single soft light glows near the reception desk, low and warm, while the rest of the space rests in a gentler dimness around it. If you look up near the ceiling, you might notice a small sensor tucked discreetly above the doors. The same kind of occupancy sensor we've talked about before, resting now in patient stillness, having sensed no movement in well over an hour. The lobby's temperature is held a little more loosely tonight than it was this afternoon, when dozens of people moved through these doors, each one briefly letting in a small breath of outside air every time the entrance opened. A sensor near the vestibule noticed every one of those small drafts today, helping the system respond gently each time, easing the space back toward comfort after every brief gust of outdoor air. Tonight, with the doors staying closed, there's nothing for that sensor to notice at all. It simply rests, the way the whole lobby rests, quiet and still beneath its single warm light. Let's move a little further in, toward the elevator lobby. The elevators themselves are dark inside right now, their doors closed, their indicator lights glowing softly above each one, marking which floor each car currently rests on. Earlier today, this small space buzzed with quiet, constant activity, people pressing buttons, doors opening and closing, soft, mechanical hums rising and falling as cars rose and descended through the building's core. A small occupancy sensor near the ceiling here noticed every one of those comings and goings, keeping the area's lighting bright enough to feel safe and welcoming throughout a long, busy day. Right now, that same sensor notices nothing. No movement, no waiting passengers glancing up at the floor indicators. So the lighting here has eased down too, just as patiently as everywhere else, ready to brighten again the instant someone steps into view. Let's continue up into one of the open office floors. This space feels larger in the dark than it ever does during the day. Rows of empty desks stretch out beneath a ceiling dotted with small, evenly spaced light fixtures, almost all of them resting now at their lowest scheduled level. A single ceiling-mounted occupancy sensor near the center of the room holds watch over the whole open area at once, its wide field of view sweeping gently across dozens of empty chairs and quiet computer monitors, none of which have moved in hours. Above the ceiling tiles, hidden from view, a scattering of VAV boxes continue their own small, ongoing work, adjusting airflow in tiny increments to whichever few zones might still be drifting slightly warmer or cooler than the rest. Most of this floor doesn't need much help holding steady tonight. The temperature here has settled into something calm and even, the kind of stillness that only comes from an entire afternoon's worth of careful, gradual adjustment finally being allowed to rest. Near the windows, the lighting fixtures closest to the glass sit a little differently than the ones further inside. During a bright afternoon, daylight pouring through those windows would have allowed these particular fixtures to dim themselves automatically, asking less of their own bulbs simply because the sun outside was doing some of the work already. Right now, with no daylight left to lean on, they've returned to their full assigned brightness. Though even that brightness has been scheduled low for this late hour, simply because there's no one here to need it any brighter. Let's step into one of the private offices along the perimeter. This is a smaller, quieter space. Just a desk, a chair, a window with the blinds drawn halfway. A small wall-mounted sensor near the door has been resting untouched for hours, its little override button gathering the same faint layer of dust it gathers most nights, waiting for a request that tonight never came. The temperature in here has drifted a degree or so from where it sat this afternoon, easing gently within the loosened range the building allows once a room has gone still for long enough. No one will notice this small drift tomorrow morning. By the time anyone arrives, the space will have already eased back towards something comfortable well before the door ever opens again. Down the hall, we'll pause at a conference room. Earlier this evening, several people sat around the long table in here for nearly an hour, talking quietly, the door closed against the hallway outside. A small sensor near the ceiling noticed their carbon dioxide slowly rising throughout that meeting, climbing gradually as more breath filled the closed room, and, in response, the ventilation serving this space gently increased, bringing in a little more fresh air to keep things comfortable without anyone needing to ask. Now, hours later, that same reading has eased all the way back down to its quiet resting baseline. The room is empty. The air feels still, and the ventilation that increased so gently earlier has eased back too, asking for nothing more than the room currently needs, which tonight is very little at all. Let's continue down to the restrooms, just past the elevator core. These rooms rarely get much thought, but they're tended to just as carefully as anywhere else. A small exhaust fan here runs quietly, day and night, pulling air steadily through the space to keep humidity and odor from ever settling for long. Tonight, with no one passing through, that fan continues at its same patient, steady pace, not because anyone is here to need it, but simply because this is one part of the building that prefers to keep a constant, gentle rhythm rather than easing back and forth the way other spaces do. A small humidity sensor nearby occasionally notices brief spikes throughout a normal day. the soft trace of water and steam drifting up after someone washes their hands. And the exhaust system responds accordingly, just for a few minutes at a time before easing back to its usual quiet baseline. Right now, there's nothing for it to respond to, just a steady, even hum, continuing exactly as it always does, this hour and every hour. Let's go somewhere a little different now, through an unmarked door near the IT closet into the server room. This space feels different the moment you step inside, even in our imagination. Cooler, steadier. The hum here is louder than anywhere else we've visited tonight, a continuous, even drone coming from precision cooling equipment that never really eases back the way the rest of the building does. Servers generate heat constantly, whether it's 2 in the afternoon or 2 in the morning. And so this room's temperature and humidity are held to a much tighter, much more careful range than anywhere else in the building, rarely allowed to drift even a degree or two, day or night. A small pressure sensor beneath the raised floor here quietly confirms that cool air is being delivered evenly beneath the equipment racks, exactly as it should be. Smoke detection sensors rest in their own patient watch overhead, sensitive enough to notice the faintest trace of trouble long before anything became visible to a person standing in the room. Nothing about this space ever truly rests the way the rest of the building does tonight. It simply continues steadily, asking for the same careful attention at 3 in the morning as it does at 3 in the afternoon. Let's step back out and head toward the stairwell at the end of the hall. This space holds a particular kind of stillness. Bare concrete steps, a faint mechanical hum drifting down from somewhere above, and a soft, low glow of light tracing the edge of each step downward into shadow. The occupancy sensor here, much like the ones in the hallways we visited earlier, waits patiently for movement, ready to brighten the space the moment someone begins climbing or descending, then easing it back to this same gentle half-light once they've passed through. In some buildings, this stairwell serves a quieter purpose too, one that has nothing to do with comfort at all. A small fan system tied closely to the building's fire and life safety equipment holds the stairwell at a very slightly different air pressure than the floors around it. Not enough to ever notice walking through, but enough, in the rare event it was ever truly needed, to help keep smoke from drifting into this particular escape path. Tonight, like nearly every night, there's nothing for that system to respond to. It simply holds its quiet readiness, the way so much of this building does, prepared for something that almost certainly won't happen, content to rest until it might. Let's go further down now, beneath the building itself, into the parking garage. The air down here feels different too, cooler, slightly metallic, touched faintly with the lingering scent of exhaust from cars that left hours ago. Long rows of concrete columns stretch out under a scattering of dim lights, most of them resting at their lowest setting, waiting for a motion sensor somewhere nearby to notice movement and brighten the space accordingly. A handful of small sensors throughout this garage continue their own quiet watch for carbon monoxide, ready to bring large exhaust fans to life if levels were ever to rise. Right now, with the garage essentially empty, there's nothing to detect. The fans rest in stillness, just like everything else down here, content to wait for a need that, tonight, simply isn't present. Let's go back up now, all the way up, past every floor we've visited, out onto the rooftop. The night air feels different up here too, open, cool, touched by a faint breeze drifting across the building's flat surface. Large metal air handling units sit quietly spaced across the rooftop, their slow, steady hum the loudest sound for what feels like miles. Somewhere nearby, a cooling tower releases a faint trace of warm mist into the night air, its fans cycling on in short, gentle bursts every so often, then resting again in between. Weatherproof sensors mounted along the rooftop's edge continue their patient measurement of outside temperature and humidity, feeding that information down into the building below, helping every floor we've just walked through quietly adjust itself to match whatever the night outside happens to be doing. Up here, more than almost anywhere else in the building, you can feel just how exposed and yet how steady this whole hidden brain remains, equipment working calmly under open sky, entirely unbothered by the late hour or the quiet dark surrounding it. Let's take one last stop before we finish our tour tonight. Back down into the building's core, into the electrical and mechanical room where so much of what we've talked about over many nights together actually comes together. This room hums softly, lit only by a scattering of small indicator lights blinking at their own steady, even pace across rows of metal panels and control cabinets. Somewhere in here, a single workstation glows quietly in the corner, its screen displaying simple graphics of everything we've just walked through: the lobby, the office floors, the server room, the rooftop equipment. Each one reduced to a calm, simple icon, easy to glance at, easy to trust. This is, in a sense, the quiet center of everything we've seen tonight, not because it controls everything directly, but because it's where so many of those small, separate conversations we've followed through hallways and offices and stairwells finally gather together, if only for a moment, into one shared, simplified view. And from here, our tour is complete. Every space we visited tonight, the lobby, the elevators, the open office floor, the private office, the conference room, the restroom, the server room, the stairwell, the parking garage, the rooftop, continues exactly as we left it, quiet, steady, watched over gently by sensors that never tire and controllers that never rush, and a whole hidden brain that simply continues its patient work, long after our imaginary footsteps have faded from every hallway we walked through together. You don't need to remember which room came first or which sensor watched over which space. You can simply let the whole tour blur softly together now, the way a long walk through a quiet building always does once you finally lie back down and let your eyes close. Every room is resting, and so now can you. Let's follow just one small thing tonight. One quiet change, and everything gentle that happens because of it. Somewhere on an upper floor, in an office that's been resting quietly for the last hour, the air has begun warming very slowly by the smallest possible amount. Nothing dramatic caused this. Maybe the afternoon sun left a little extra warmth in the walls that's only now working its way into the room. Maybe a nearby server closet is venting just a touch of heat through a shared wall. It doesn't really matter why. What matters is that the room, ever so gently, has begun drifting upward, away from where it's supposed to rest. 1/10 of a degree, then another 1/10, slow enough that if you were sitting in that room right now, you would never notice anything happening at all. But the sensor notices. Mounted quietly on the wall, that small thermistor we've talked about before continues its patient, continuous sensing, and as the air around it warms, its resistance shifts, just slightly, in response. This isn't a sudden alert. It isn't a flashing light. It's simply a number somewhere in a controller's memory beginning to climb, one small fraction at a time, the way the mercury in an old thermometer might slowly rise on a warming afternoon. The controller responsible for this particular zone checks in on that number every few seconds, the way it always does, comparing it gently to the set point this room is supposed to be holding. For the first several check-ins, the difference is so small it barely registers as a difference at all. The controller simply notes it and waits the way you might notice a faint change in light without yet feeling any need to do anything about it. But the room keeps drifting. Another tenth of a degree, then another, and at some point, calmly, without any urgency at all, the controller decides that this small gradual rise has finally crossed the gentle threshold where a response actually makes sense. So it acts, quietly, gradually, the way it always does. Above the ceiling tiles in that office, a small VAV box has been holding its damper at a modest resting position for the last hour, delivering just enough cool air to maintain the room's comfortable balance. Now, in response to the controller's quiet decision, that damper begins to open a little further. Not suddenly, not all the way, just a few % more than it was a moment ago, easing open the way a hand might slowly widen a gap in a curtain, letting in a little more light without throwing the whole curtain open at once. More cool air begins flowing into the room, slowly, steadily. The kind of change that, again, no one sitting in that office would ever notice happening, even if they were awake and sitting there right now. This small adjustment doesn't happen in isolation, though. As that VAV box opens further, it asks, in its own quiet way, for a little more air than the duct serving it was previously delivering. A pressure sensor in that same duct notices this faint shift, the air moving past it just slightly faster than before, and reports this change back toward the air handler responsible for the whole system. Meanwhile, dozens of other VAV boxes throughout this same floor continue holding their own steady positions, unaffected, uninvolved, simply continuing whatever they were already doing in their own separate corners of the building. This one small office's gentle request doesn't ripple out dramatically across the entire floor. It stays mostly contained, a small local conversation between one room and the equipment serving it. Up on the rooftop, or perhaps in a large mechanical room somewhere on a lower level, the air handler serving this floor receives this same gentle signal, a slight increase in demand for cooled air. Its own internal logic, every bit as patient as the controller we just left behind, considers this change calmly. The fan inside, which had been turning at a steady, modest pace, begins to speed up just slightly, asking its motor for a touch more effort than a moment ago. A variable frequency drive manages this increase smoothly, easing the fan's speed upward across several gentle seconds rather than snapping it instantly to a faster setting. As more air begins moving through this air handler, it also begins drawing a little more cooling from the coil it passes across, a coil filled with chilled water flowing in from somewhere else in the building entirely. And so this one small, quiet request, born from one slightly warm room many floors above, begins reaching even further outward now, toward the building's chilled water system. Down in the central plant, sometimes a basement, sometimes a separate mechanical building nearby, A pump has been circulating chilled water at a calm, modest pace for the last hour, matched closely to how little the building has needed overall through this quiet stretch of night. As the air handler upstairs begins asking for a bit more cooling, that demand travels backward through the system as a subtle change in temperature or flow somewhere along the chilled water loop. The pump notices in its own slow, responsive way and begins turning just a little faster, increasing its own effort by a small, measured amount to keep pace with what's being asked of it. This is, again, never a sudden surge. The pump doesn't lurch into higher speed. It eases there gradually, the way nearly everything in this entire building seems to ease into anything at all, never startled, never rushed, simply adjusting at exactly the pace the situation calls for and not one bit faster. As that pump works just slightly harder, the chiller responsible for actually cooling this water continues its own steady operation, asking perhaps for a small increase in its own effort too, though on a calm night like this one, that increase likely stays modest, well within whatever fraction of its full capacity it's already been comfortably running at. The chiller doesn't need to strain. This is still, after all, just one small office's gentle drift, not some sudden citywide heat wave demanding everything the system has to offer. Out past the building's walls entirely, on a quiet rooftop or tucked into a side yard somewhere, a cooling tower continues its own patient rhythm. Fans cycling on for short bursts, then resting, then cycling on again, rejecting a small amount of heat from the system's water into the cool night air outside. As the chilled water plant works just slightly harder to answer that one warm office's quiet request, the cooling tower too might run its fans for a few additional minutes tonight, drawing that traveling heat one final step further away from the building, releasing it gently into the dark sky above. And so here we are, one small office, one slightly warm reading, and an entire quiet chain of responses rippling outward. Sensor to controller, controller to VAV box, VAV box to air handler to chilled water pump to chiller, chiller to cooling tower. Each link in that chain responding calmly, gradually, exactly as much as needed, and never more. Back in that original office, the cool air now flowing a little more generously through the vents above begins doing its quiet work. The room's temperature, which had drifted upward so gradually, begins easing back downward now just as gradually as it rose, 1/10 of a degree, then another. The same patient thermistor that first noticed the warming now notices this slow return, reporting it faithfully back to the controller overseeing this small, quiet corner of the building. As the room eases back toward its set point, the controller notices this too and begins easing its own response back in turn. The VAV box, which had opened its damper slightly to deliver more air, now begins closing that damper back down, just as gradually as it opened, matching its delivery once again to the room's settling, calming needs. This eases backward through the whole chain we just followed. The air handler's fan slows its slight increase, returning toward its earlier, gentler pace. The chilled water pump eases its own effort back down, matching the air handler's now lessened demand. The chiller settles back toward whatever modest fraction of its capacity this quiet night truly requires. And the cooling tower, with less heat now needing to be rejected, allows its fans a little more rest between each short cycle. Nothing about this return trip happens any faster than the original rise did. The whole system eases back into its calm, resting state with the same unhurried patience it used to respond in the first place. No part of this conversation from beginning to end ever felt rushed. No part of it ever needed to. And through all of this, the rise, the response, the gentle return, something else has been quietly happening in the background the entire time. A trend log somewhere in the building's memory recorded every small step of this journey as it unfolded. The room's temperature rising in small increments, then falling again. The VAV box's damper position opening slightly, then easing closed. The chilled water flow increasing modestly, then settling back down. If someone were to look at this trend log tomorrow, or even right now, glancing at a softly glowing screen somewhere far from this office, they would likely see nothing more dramatic than a small, gentle bump in an otherwise calm, flat line, a tiny hill rising softly and falling softly again, the visual echo of one small room's quiet warming and one whole building's quiet, coordinated response. This is, in its own small way, the entire story we've been telling across so many nights now. Not one dramatic system reacting forcefully to one dramatic problem. Just a long, gentle chain of small, patient responses, each one perfectly matched to whatever the moment actually required, rippling outward and then rippling back, leaving almost no visible trace behind except a soft, rounded curve on a quiet graph that almost no one will ever think to look at twice. Right now, in that same office, the air feels exactly the way it did an hour ago. Calm, settled, entirely unremarkable. No one will ever know tomorrow morning that anything happened here at all. And in a sense, nothing did. Nothing large enough to deserve anyone's attention. Just one small, quiet adjustment, made and unmade by a whole patient system working exactly as it was built to, long after everyone went home. This is what this entire building does, every single night, over and over, in dozens of small corners at once, each one its own quiet, complete little story of warming and cooling, rising and easing, sensed and adjusted and settled again. Most of these stories will never be told. Most of them will simply happen and resolve and disappear softly back into stillness, the way this one is disappearing right now. You don't need to follow any of these stories any further tonight. You can simply imagine that small office settling now into its calm, even temperature, the cool air easing to a gentle rest, the damper holding steady, the distant hum of pumps and fans softening back into the same quiet rhythm they held before any of this ever began. Somewhere, this same quiet chain of sensing and response is happening right now, in countless rooms, in countless buildings, all without anyone needing to notice or understand or even know it's happening at all. You can rest exactly the same way. Let your own breathing settle, the way that room's temperature just settled. Let your own thoughts ease back into stillness, the way that damper just eased closed. Nothing more needs to happen tonight. The building has it. Rest now.